This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi. We're only a day before Erev Rosh Hashanah. So today, this morning, with your permission, we're going to discuss the mitzvah that we have ahead of us, and that is the mitzvah of Tekiyas Shofar. The mitzvah of blowing the shofar. And we would like to discuss it in a halachic sense, in a Lomdus sense, to really get to the bottom of what is the mitzvah of Tekiyas Shofar. And this is a topic that I've been thinking about and preparing and collecting sources for many years, but I'm not ready yet to present you with Marmakaimis, but I have it clarified to a certain degree, and that's what I want to present you. And that is, we begin, what is the mitzvah of Tekiyas Shofar? Well, the Smag, the Sefer Mitzvahs Gedolos, writes in Mitzvah Membes, Mitzvahs aseh litzkaya b'shofar b'Rosh Hashanah. The mitzvah is to blow the shofar, like the pasuk says, Yom Trua. So the Smag writes, there's a mitzvah to blow the shofar. Okay? The Sheiltis of Rabbi Chaygain in Mitzvah Kuf Ayin Aleph writes, the Mechayvin de Beis Yisrael lemitka. The mitzvah is to blow the shofar. Says the Rosh in the name of Rabbeinu Tam. Says the Rosh in the name of Rabbeinu Tam. Now Rabbeinu Tam, you have to realize, you have to know, was, for Ashkenazim, the greatest of all the Rishonim. The Rosh writes about Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam was Gadol b'chachma u'v'minyan, even more than the Rambam. And generally, Ashkenazim follow the psak of Rabbeinu Tam. And Rabbeinu Tam, quoted by the Rosh, says that therefore, what bracha should you make on the shofar? For Rabbeinu Tam kasav sheyesh levarech al tekiyas shofar al tekiyas shofar al tekiyas shofar. Why? Mishum de asiyasa hi gemar mitzvahs. So here we have it. Rabbeinu Tam paskins, the correct bracha on shofar is al tekiyas shofar. So again, the Smag says mitzvah saseh litzkaya. The Sheiltis says mechayvin beis Yisrael lemiska. Rabbeinu Tam says the correct bracha on the shofar is al tekiyas shofar. Don't cry. That's just that's the reality. It's the facts. However, comes the Rambam. And the Rambam, in no less than 7 places, disagrees. The Rambam writes in 7 places that there's a mitzvah to listen to the sound of the shofar. So if you look, you open up the Rambam, Yad HaChazaka, Hilchos Shofar, even before the Rambam begins to say any halachas, even before Parak Aleph, Halacha Aleph, the Rambam writes that the headline, in other words, the headline of the group of halachas is called Lishmaya Koil Shofar Be'echad B'Tishrei, to listen to the sound of the shofar.
In other words, he don't care what anybody says.
He doesn't, right. Parak Aleph.
He was first.
Yeah? Halacha Aleph. Mitzvah Aseh Shel Torah Lishmoya Truas HaShofar. Parak Aleph Halacha Gimel. The Rambam says, you'll say, who cares what the mitzvah is? You go to shul and you do what you got to do. With the nafkamina, you blow the shofar, you hear the shofar. Yeah. Says around there's nafkamina. You steal a sukkah, are you yotzei? No. You steal a lulav and esrog, are you yotzei? No. You steal a shofar?
Yes.
You're yotzei. Why?
That's a hearing.
Because there's no mitzvah to blow a shofar. The shofar is not really that important. The mitzvah is to hear the shofar. The shofar is merely the instrument that's used to produce the sound. You can't steal the sound. You can't steal. In other words, would anybody say if you steal a hammer, then the sukkah is possible? Would anyone say if you steal the sickle to cut the lulav and esrog off the tree, you're not? It's a possible? Of course not. So too, the Rambam says a shofar is not a chetza shel mitzvah. You hear that? The shofar is not a chetza shel mitzvah. The shofar is merely the instrument with which we use to produce the sound. And therefore, shofar hagazol Shetaka ba yatsa. The Rambam, Perik Beis, Halacha Aleph, HaKoil Chayovin Lishmoya Koil Shofar. The Rambam in the Minyan HaMitzvahs HaKotzer, Mitzvahs Hasei Kuf Ayin, Lishmoya Koil Shofar. The Rambam in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, Shetzivanu Lishmoya Koil Shofar. So you're asking Glatstein, you said there's 7 places where the Rambam says it, and you only quoted 6. That's because there's the famous Tshuva of the Rambam. The Rambam writes in the Tshuvas HaRambam. Who knows what the name of the Sefer, the Tshuvas HaRambam, is called? What's the name of the Rambam's Tshuvas? Shalos Tshuvas. Pe'er Hadar. Pe'er Hadar. Now, the biography of the Chazon Ish was also called Pe'er Hadar. That's what I'm talking about. The Tshuvas HaRambam Pe'er Hadar. He says, what's the difference if the mitzvah is to hear or the mitzvah is to blow? Says the Rambam is a big nafkamina.
But if you don't have the shofar, you can't do it.
Oh, so Rambam says, if the mitzvah was to blow... No, it's not a chefza shel mitzvah.
How do you produce the sound? How do you make the sound?
Is the hammer with which you build a sukkah a chefza shel mitzvah? How else are you going to build the sukkah? No, it's just it's an instrument used to create the item with which you have the mitzvah. So to the shofar is not the chefza shel mitzvah, it's just the instrument that's used to produce what's needed to be yotzei the mitzvah. Says the Rambam, if the mitzvah was to blow the shofar, guess how many people in the shul would be yotzei the mitzvah?
One.
Only one. Only the guy who blows the shofar. You know why? Because if the mitzvah is to blow and it's a chiv shebeguf, you can't put on tefillin for me, and you can't put on talis for me, and you can't send the sukkah for me. If the mitzvah is to blow, you should not be able to
be mekayim the mitzvah of shofar.
Be mekayim the mitzvah of shofar. Oh! And if the mitzvah was to blow, and you blew, and you didn't hear, would you be yotzei? Yeah. If the mitzvah was to blow, and you blew and you stuck your fingers in your ears, you'd also be yotzei.
Why?
Because the mitzvah is just to blow.
But
now that the mitzvah is not to blow, the mitzvah is to hear, so if you heard, but you didn't blow, you'll be yotzei. And therefore the Rambam says, bottom line, the bracha should be Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu lishmaya kol shofar. Yeah?
yes.
Not al tkiyashay. And the Rosh quotes the Ravya and the Bahag, who also say the mitzvah is to hear and not to blow. Now, you ready? Fasten your seatbelts. We want to analyze this machlokes between Rabbeinu Tam, who says the mitzvah is to blow, the bracha is al tkiyah shofar, and the Rambam, who says the mitzvah is to listen, lishmaya kosher. The Rosh quotes the Ravya and the Bahag, who bring the following proof that the mitzvah is to hear. Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, if you blow in a pit, hatokea b'soich habar, and you couldn't hear it, says the Mishnah, are you yotzei? You didn't hear the sound, you heard the echo, hatokea l'toich habar, and you didn't hear the sound, are you yotzei? Not yotzei! According to Rabbeinu Tam, why are you not yotzei? You blew!
But you didn't hear.
Oh, it's a raya to the Rambam. The mitzvah is not to blow, the mitzvah is to hear. Because if the mitzvah was to blow, why? Hatoikeya l'soich habar lo yatsa. That is the proof of the Ravya quoted by the Rosh. Okay?
What if the mitzvah one before what? The shmoa?
If the mitzvah was to blow, then why, if you're toikeya l'toich habar, are you not yotze? You blew. It must be. The mitzvah is not to blow. The mitzvah is to hear. Okay. Now, by the way, this is very interesting. There's a rare tshuva of the Maharama al-Shakar. Maharama al-Shakar in Siman Yud. He says there's no raya from this Mishnah that the mitzvah is to hear. Again, the proof seems very clear. It says if you blow in a pit and you can't hear, you're not yotze. That would seem to indicate the mitzvah is to hear and not to blow. Says Maram al-Shakar, not a raya at all. Really, I'll tell you, the mitzvah is to blow. So then why, if you blow in a pit, are you not yotzei? You blew. Says Maram al-Shakar, let's talk about Kriya Shema. is the mitzvah to say Kriya Shema, or is the mitzvah to hear Kriya Shema?
Say.
Say, of course. The mitzvah is Kriya Shema. Read it. There's no mitzvah to hear Kriya Shema. The mitzvah is to say it. But what if you said it and you couldn't hear yourself saying it?
You're okay.
There's an opinion, you're not yet. Opinion. We pass in b'diavad, la yishmei la'aznai, b'diavad, you're yatsa. But l'chatchila, everyone agrees you have to hear it. But one second, if the mitzvah is to say the Shema and not to hear the Shema, why do I have to hear it? The answer is, yeah, the mitzvah is to say it. But the mitzvah is to say it in such a way that you're able to hear it. So too, maybe I'll tell you Rabbeinu Tam is right. The mitzvah is to blow the shofar. If you blew it in a pit, why you're not yotzei? But I blew it. The answer is the mitzvah is to blow it. But the mitzvah is to blow it in such a way that you're able to hear it. The mitzvah is not hearing it. It's just maybe there's another requirement that you have to blow. The mitzvah is to blow. I'll tell you like Rabbeinu Tam. The mitzvah is to blow the shofar. So then why is the halacha if you blow it in a pit and you didn't hear it, you're not yotzei? The answer is the same way if you say Shema and you don't hear it, there's a problem with the Shema. Even though the mitzvah is to read the Shema, not to hear the Shema, so too with shofar. The mitzvah is to blow. But if you blew in such a way that you can't hear it, maybe you're not yotzei. Okay. So again, we have these two opinions, yeah? We have the opinion of the Rambam, the mitzvah is to hear, and we have the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam, who says to make a bracha al tikiyah shofar, to blow. We're now going to ask a big kasha on the Rambam. You ready? The Mishnah says in Masechta Rosh Hashanah, Daf Chav Tes, a cheresh shaita v'katan. Right? A deaf mute. A shaita. You know what a shaita is? Yeah? A katan. Could they blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah?
Yeah, we might see other.
Ein moitziin es harabim midei chadas. They can't blow shofar for everyone. Comes the Shagas Aryeh. No, you're following me. The Mishnah says, a cheresh shaita v'katan cannot blow the shofar for the tzibur. Ask the Shagas Aryeh if the Rambam is correct that the only mitzvah is to listen. So what's wrong if a cheresh shaita v'katan blows the shofar? I heard the shofar. I heard it. They're not being moitzi me anything. They're not being moitzi me. I'm doing everything myself. The same way, right? The Rambam says that if you steal the shofar, you're yotzei, because the shofar is not a chefza shel mitzvah. The shofar is just the instrument used to produce the sound. So why can't a cheresh shaita v'katan be moitzi the Rambam yidei chayvasai? What are they doing? They're not doing anything for me. The mitzvah is to listen, and I heard. There seems to be a raya to Rabbeinu Tam that the mitzvah of shofar, the mitzvah is to blow, and they're blowing for me. But if they're a cheresh and they're a shaita and they're a katan and they're not mechuyev b'davar, how could they blow for me? But if the mitzvah was merely to listen, then why can't the cheresh, shaita, v'katan do it? That's the kasha of the Shagas Aryeh on the Rambam.
You need a baldas.
Why do you need a baldas?
Oh, you could train the dog to blow the shofar. And the dog somehow blew it into a shofar and made the sound. Could you do that? No. The sounds have to come from a baldas.
Why?
They have to come from a Shiur.
What's the mitzvah?
What?
What's the mitzvah?
It's supposed to hear the sound.
So I heard a sound.
Okay, so you train the dog to blow the shofar so you heard the sounds? Somehow can teach you that's not human.
Maybe that's not
You're hearing
considered.
the sound.
That's not considered the sound of a shofar. The sound of a shofar has to be produced by a human. So you're saying the same way a sound of a shofar needs to be produced by a human, it has to be produced by someone who's mechuyev in the mitzvah. Is the sound any different? Is the sound any different? It's the same sound. Comes the Shagas Aryeh, and he says from this Mishnah, Masechta Rosh Hashanah, it's a proof against the Rambam. The Rambam says the mitzvah is to listen. If the mitzvah is just to listen, so let anyone blow the shofar. Call your kid. I know, one thing I can't do is I can't blow a shofar. I can't. My 4-year-old could blow the shofar. My 6-year-old could blow the shofar. Everyone in my family could blow a shofar. I can't blow a shofar. I can't do it. So I have my kid blow shofar for me. Especially according to the Rambam, the mitzvah is just to listen. The mitzvah is, I blow a shofar, my face vibrates. I don't like it. It's not for me. I like to talk about the Lomdus of the shofar. Blowing the shofar, that's a different story. So the Shagas Aryeh says, we see from here, not like the Rambam, that even though the mitzvah is to listen, it must be, there's also a mitzvah to blow. There are two parts of the mitzvah. There are two parts of the mitzvah. There's a mitzvah to listen, and there's a mitzvah to blow. You need both.
Which one can you not be yotze with?
And therefore,
The regular blower.
if the regular blower does it, you get both. He's blowing, so he's being mitzi you for the blowing, and the hearing you're doing yourself.
But we said it's a mitzvah shebekufa.
Okay, we're not. That's why the Rambam did not entertain the possibility of their mitzvah being to blow. But the Shagas Aryeh says you have to say there's part of the mitzvah is to blow. Why? From the fact that a cherei shoytev a katan who blows the shofar for you, you're not yotze. How can that be? You're not yotze.
I'm sorry. Is that your light blue? Can you move it? Because Remco wants to get out. I'm sorry. I hate to interrupt against the leaf. If we just move, he'll just go and we can go back on the spot again.
Thank you. So again, the question is, according to the Rambam, that the mitzvah is to hear the sound of the shofar. Why does the Mishnah say in Masechta Rosh Hashanah Daf Chav Tes, Cherei shoytev v'katan eino yotze, eino motzi rav midei chayvasam? It must be. There's also an element of the mitzvah of blowing, and it's that element that the Cherei shoytev v'katan cannot be motzi. Comes the Chazon Ish. Yeah, and the Chazon Ish says he doesn't feel that the Mishnah Masechta Rosh Hashanah is a kasha on the Rambam. Really, says the Chazon Ish, I'll say the Rambam is 100% correct. The mitzvah is only to listen. The mitzvah is only to listen. Why can you be yotze from a cherei shoytev v'katan? The answer is, like you were saying before, the same way you can't have a dog blow the shofar. Let's say you train a monkey to blow the shofar for you. Could you, according to the Rambam, could you be yotze? Well, I heard the mitzvah is to hear, and I heard. That's not called, you have to hear a halachic sound. When you heard the sound of a shofar? If let's say a guy blew the shofar, could you be yotze? Can't be yotze. That's not considered a halachic sound.
Teach the monkey to blow a halach.
Let's say you teach the monkey, right? You train him. Okay, they have a book now. They came out with a new sefer. Like they give you the technical skills of blowing the shofar. So even a guy like me, I could learn to vibrate my right. So you teach it to a kaif. Yeah, you teach a monkey, an elephant. Well, you put the shofar in the trunk of the elephant. You get a nice big mouthpiece. You stuff up that, and you go right, and he blows shofar. You yotze? Why not? The Rambam says that the mitzvah is to hear, and I heard. The answer is you have to hear a halachic sound. So the same way, the sound of an animal, the sound you cannot be yotze from. So too, if the person himself is not mechuyev b'davar, a cherei shoytev v'katan, the sound he produces, perhaps you could suggest, is not considered a halachic sound, and therefore, you would not be able to be yotze. In other words, the Chazon Ish is arguing on the Shagas Aryeh. Shagas Aryeh says, from the fact that the Mishnah says in Rosh Hashanah that a cherei shoytev v'katan can't be mitzi, that must mean that blowing is a chelek of the mitzvah. Says the Chazon Ish. No. Chazon Ish is in Archaim Siman Chav Tes. That doesn't necessarily mean blowing is a chelek of the mitzvah. It could be blowing is only hechsher mitzvah. However, in order to be yotze, the mitzvah of listening, you have to listen to a halachic sound. And the sound produced by a cherei shoytev v'katan is not considered a halachic sound.
What's a gadol has to do?
Well, let's take this a little further. Because the Shagas Aryeh didn't just bring a proof from a Chever Shet V'Katan. What if somebody was doing oral exercise, and he has to, he's exercising his lungs. So the doctor told him, breathe in, breathe out. And he's looking for something to breathe into, and he takes something off the table, he picks up a shofar or something, and he blows, Tkiya, Trua, it's called Masasik. Masasik means he's trying to do something else, and in the course of his activity, he ended up doing a mitzvah.
You can't be Yotzei with that.
Are you Yotzei?
No.
He's not. But I heard it.
Huh?
I heard him blow.
Yeah, but he didn't make a bracha on it. There was a lot
Since when is a bracha? It's not ma'akev.
But, no, it's not?
No.
Okay.
If you put on tefillin and you don't make a bracha, are you Yotzei? 100%.
Okay.
If you blow shofar and you don't make a bracha, you're Yotzei. So says the Shagas Aryeh, the Gemara says that Misasik, if someone was doing, breathing exercise and he blew shofar and you heard it, are you Yotzei? Why not?
Because he didn't blow to blow.
So what do you want to say? I understand the Cheirei Shot of a Katan. Cheirei Shot of a Katan is not mechuyev in the mitzvah. So he's not mechuyev in the mitzvah. So he can't be moitzi me. What do you mean moitzi me? He's not being moitzi me anything. My mitzvah is to listen. Well, you didn't listen to a halachic sound. Because since he's not mechuyev in the mitzvah, he can't produce a halachic sound. Fine. But here I have a guy, he's 50 years old. He's the Gadol Hadar. He's mechuyev in the mitzvah. He's doing breathing exercises.
Well, doesn't the halachic sound have to be l'shma?
He's mechuyev to listen, not to blow.
So now you want to say further. Now you want to say the definition of a halachic sound is not only a sound produced by someone mechuyev b'davar, it also has to be produced by someone mechuyev b'davar, and he has to be thinking that he's doing it for the mitzvah of shofar.
So if you pass a shul,
Okay, well, calm down. Hold on. Hang on to that. Hang on to that for 1 second. So I guess we're going to have to say, and this is what the Chazon Ish says, that the definition of a halachic sound is not just a sound produced by a mechuyev b'davar, it's also produced by a mechuyev b'davar that has in mind to be mekayim the mitzvah of shofar. Okay? And that is what the Chazon Ish says to defend the Rambam from the kasha of the Shagas Aryeh. By the way, if you look in the Mekorei Kodesh of Rabbi Tzvi Pesach Frank, he also answers up this question of the Shagas Aryeh. Shagas Aryeh wants to know, but Cheirei Shot V'Katan can't be moitzi you. Why not? The mitzvah is to listen. So you heard. So he says, no, you didn't hear a halachic sound. Anu, so now ask your kasha.
you pass a shul, you hear shofar, you're Yotzei. You pass someone's house and you hear the shofar, you could think you're Yotzei also. So what you're saying is, it depends on who's blowing and what the blower has in mind.
Well, certainly if the blower was trying to do breathing exercises and it wasn't even trying to be mekayim a mitzvah, you can't be Yotzei. But let's talk about the following case. You're passing by a shul and you're on the outside of the shul or in the back. And you hear the shofar. Are you Yotzei?
Front, back, wherever, outside.
It's questionable. It's questionable. Yeah, because maybe the Baal Tekeya only had in mind the people in the shul, not people out of the shul. Or what if the following case, halach l'maisa, there's a guy blowing shofar for his wife, and he has in mind he's blowing only for his wife. And there's someone in the next room that hears, and he has in mind to be Yotzei, but the Baal Tekeya does not have in mind to be moitzi him. Are you Yotzei or are you not Yotzei?
No.
The Rambam writes, you are not Yotzei. If the Baal Tekeya blows a shofar, and he has in mind to be moitzi the listener, and the listener doesn't have in mind to be Yotzei, not Yotzei. If the listener has in mind to be Yotzei, but the Baal Tekeya doesn't have in mind to be moitzi him, also not Yotzei. You need kavanas mashmiya, and you need the kavanah of the shoymeya. So now, this is going to be a very strong question. Here you have a guy, he's blowing the shofar. Is he mechuyev in the mitzvah? Yes. Is he blowing it for breathing exercises? No, he's blowing it to kind of mitzvah shayf. But he doesn't have in mind the listener. Who cares? Did the listener hear? Yes. Did he hear a halachic sound? Yes. Did he hear the sound of a shofar that was being produced as a mitzvah sound? Yes. So what if the blower did not have him in mind? I understand if the mitzvah is blowing the shofar, then the blower has to have in mind the listener. But if the mitzvah is listening, and we've stretched and extended ourselves so far, as if to say that, it's not enough to listen, but you also have to hear a halachic sound. Fine, I heard a halachic sound. What am I missing? The guy who blew it was not a chiyur shayt v'katan. The guy who blew it was not nesasek. He was having in mind to blow a sound of a mitzvah. Why in the world would he have to have in mind to be mitzi me? If the mitzvah is to listen, why would he have to have in mind to be mitzi me? That is ultimately a bumba. That's a very strong question on the Rambam. You want to answer the question of the Shagis Aryeh by saying, well, chiyur shayt v'katan, the mitzvah is to listen, but you have to hear a halachic sound. And a chiyur shayt v'katan does not produce a halachic sound. Fine. You want to say, that if you're just blowing for breathing exercises and someone hears, you're not yotzei because you didn't hear a halachic sound. The halachic sound is the sound of someone who's trying to be kind of mitzvah, fine. But why would the blower have to have in mind the listener? After all, the Rambam says if you steal a shofar, you're yotzei. The shofar is only an instrument. Why would I have to have you in mind? And this is a bam kasha on the Rambam. Chazonish says words that if the blower doesn't have in mind the listener, then the listener is also not listening to a halachic sound. Why should that be? He blew a sound of a mitzvah. He blew the shofar. Having you in mind is only in order to transfer something to you. I have to have in mind. When do I have to have you in mind? To be mitzi you. But if the mitzvah is to listen, I'm not being mitzi you. The listener is doing the mitzvah himself. So if you look in the Sefer Eretz Tzvi, or of Hershel Schachter, he brings this question on the Chazonish. It's a very strong question. Very hard to understand the Chazonish. And in the Sefer Yom HaZikaron of Rabbi Yonason Sachs, and he quotes Rav Soloveitchik, and Rav Hershel Schachter's Sefer Eretz Tzvi, he quotes Rav Soloveitchik, and I heard it from other sources that the Avnei Nezer says the same thing. I was not able to find in the Avnei Nezer. I'm not convinced the Avnei Nezer says this, but listen to the following idea. And this will try to explain the Machlokes Rabbeinu Tam and the Rambam. Rabbeinu Tam says the mitzvah is al tkiyah shofar, and the Rambam says the mitzvah is lishmaya. And we could possibly, Mr. Caro, answer the question, if the mitzvah is, according to those who say the mitzvah is to blow, then how could somebody blow for me? It's a mitzvah shebegufa. How could someone do the mitzvah for me? So we could say like this. Every mitzvah has two parts to it. Every single mitzvah has two parts, but more often than not, the two parts are the same thing. There's the act of the mitzvah, and there's the fulfillment of the mitzvah. Let's talk about tefillin. What's the act of the mitzvah? Putting on tefillin. What's the fulfillment of the mitzvah? When you put on the tefillin. The act and the fulfillment, it's the same thing. You fulfill the mitzvah when the act is done. Talis, the mitzvah is to wrap yourself. The fulfillment is when you wrap yourself. It's almost impossible to split. But there are some mitzvahs that the act and the fulfillment are separate. Let's talk about the mitzvah of simcha. Let's say eating meat on Yom Tov, yeah? What's the act? What's the act of the mitzvah? Eating the meat. What's the fulfillment of the mitzvah? You fulfill the mitzvah when you're happy. Now, Chazal say, eating meat by definition makes you happy. But the fulfillment is the feeling of simcha. The act is the eating the meat, and the fulfillment is when you have the simcha from that meat. It happens automatically, but if you would define it, it would be defined as two separate things. The act is eating the meat, the fulfillment. Or let's say, avelos, lo yaleinu. The act of the mitzvah is the acts of avelos, the sitting on the floor, the tearing, and the fulfillment is when you have, therefore, the feelings of sorrow. I'll give you another example. The mitzvah of Sefer Torah. What's the mitzvah? The mitzvah, there's a mitzvah to write a Sefer Torah. So if I write a Sefer Torah for you, I get the mitzvah? No, Mr. Karo, what do you say? If I'm a Sefer, and you pay me $50,000 to write you a Sefer Torah, who gets the mitzvah?
I would think you do.
The Sefer gets the mitzvah. Sefer gets the cash. Mr. Karo gets the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to write it, and the fulfillment is when you have it.
So the fulfillment counts more than you.
So you could hire me to do the act for you, but you're the one who is fulfilling it by having it. When it comes to the mitzvah of Shofar, the Rambam is correct. How do you fulfill the mitzvah of Shofar? By hearing the sound of the Shofar.
The fulfillment.
That's how you fulfill the mitzvah, by hearing it. What's the act of the mitzvah, though? The Maisa mitzvah is the blowing. That's not how you fulfill it. The fulfillment is the hearing. The Maisa is the blowing. Nobody could fulfill a mitzvah for anybody else. You can't fulfill a mitzvah. You can't put on tefillin for me and fulfill tefillin for me. You can't fulfill talis for me. You can't fulfill sukkah for me. You can't fulfill shofar for me. I have to hear it. But the fulfillment is not the act. The act is the blowing. You could do the act for me, the same way you could write a Sefer Torah for me. You can't own it for me, but you could write it for me. The mitzvah, the Maisa mitzvah of Shofar is blowing the Shofar, but the fulfillment of it is by hearing it. So it's like this. The Rambam's 100% correct. You want to know what the mitzvah is? The Rambam says in 7 places. A Jew must hear the sound of the Shofar. That's it. That's the whole fulfillment. However, how do you fulfill it? The Maisa mitzvah is through blowing. Oh, the Maisa is through blowing. And who's doing that act for you? Somebody else. That's somebody else. Gotta be a bar chiyuva. He better be doing the act for the purpose of the mitzvah. And he has to transfer the act to you. He has to have you in mind. He has to have you in mind. So now the question is, this pshat maintains, the Avnei Nezer, Rav Soloveitchik, that what should the bracha be? Should the bracha be on the fulfillment, or should the bracha be on the act? Says Rabbeinu Tam, I agree 1,000% to the Rambam. The mitzvah of shofar is to hear the sound of the shofar. But when we make brachos on the act of the mitzvah. We describe the act, and therefore the bracha should be al tkiyah shofar. That's not the fulfillment of the mitzvah. Fulfillment is listening, but the act of the mitzvah is the al tkiyah shofar, is the blowing the shofar. The Rambam says no. The Rambam says if the fulfillment of the mitzvah is listening to the sound of the shofar, then that's the way the bracha should be formulated. The shmaya koil shofar. So it could be that it's not a machlokes. Everybody agrees. The fulfillment is listening. The ma'isa is the blowing. A fulfillment you got to do yourself. Everyone has to hear the shofar themselves. The act of the mitzvah, and according to this, that explains very beautifully why a cheresh advokatan cannot blow. That explains very beautifully why misasek is not yotzei. That explains very beautifully why you need to be mechavein to be moitzi, the listener. But that's still not the kiyum hamitzvah. The kiyum hamitzvah is listening. The ma'isa mitzvah, that is blowing. Okay, so this is a very interesting possibility in defining the mitzvah of tkiyah shofar. And with this, I wish you all ksivach simatayva, Hashanah tayva, masuka, malei Hashem kol mashallah slibchem l'tayva.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.